So, welcome everybody at the Center for Design. I'm Paolo Zuccarelli. I'm the founding director of the center. I'm very, very happy, very glad to welcome all of you here for this activity that relates with patient centeredness. Design and healthcare is a kind of a new, relationship here. I mean, within the center, not you generalize, not distant, but I would say one of the most prolific and productive research direction that it's supported the last couple of years. So this is just an example of the kind of productivity that this research line is producing. And I'm very happy to start this research book with this specific topic and putting the patient at the center of anything that we design for. So without further ado, I leave the floor, the stage to Miso Kim, Michael Majors, that will run the workshop together with you. And thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of the week, the Design Research Week, if you manage to be part of it. Thank you, Miso, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So hello, thank you for joining our roundtable session to discuss the meanings of patient-centeredness. I will start by sharing some context of this study. Our project empowering, I need to go all the way to, I was transitioning before the presentation. Okay, so our project empowering patientship aims to study the meanings and patterns of patient-centeredness. The project was initiated in 2017 at Politecnico di Milano. The goal was to build a theoretical framework to identify, map, and systematize patient-centric design cases in Italy. Since 2022, a collaboration has begun with the Center for Design at Northeastern University. Currently, the Milan and Boston teams are mapping and comparing patient-centered projects in two regions with the aim of humanizing healthcare. And as part of that effort, we are doing research about what is patient-centeredness. And last year, we organized a roundtable of experts to collect the meanings of the patient-centeredness from different disciplines. And then as we are doing that, we realized that patients here, we need to hear patients' perspective before we organize all these different into the definition. So that's how we decided to organize the. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us today and coming here all the way. So I also wanted to also share briefly the research that we have been doing so far about the definition, so that it can be maybe beginning point for your brainstorming and private inspiration. Okay, so this is our research question that I'm going to introduce today. What is patient-centeredness in healthcare and design? First, we conducted a literature review across different disciplines in healthcare. We found that there are 10 main areas of overlap with listening to patients and center. Systematic reviews viewed patient-centeredness as taking into account a holistic view of the patient and incorporating their wishes and capabilities. This leads to the creation of individualized care plans, of course. Most reviews stressed honest sharing of information with the patient and taking efforts to convey medical knowledge and options in a way that patients can understand and make their own decisions. A dominant concept is that the doctor and patient should share power in collaboration of a healthcare plan. Some doctors view giving patients the option to make what they perceive to be a suboptimal choices to be violation of medical ethics. However, others believe in an iterative communication process in which the patient can actively involve in requesting changes in care. On an organizational level, patient-centeredness is also viewed as optimizing the overall experience of patients from the moment into the facility. We have also viewed cases from existing projects to distill concepts that convey patient-centeredness as reflected in practice. The most dominant theme was early detection and minimizing preventable harm amongst patients. A number of projects were designed to identify and reduce patient safety threats. Designed to track biostatistics. Oh,
I think I'm muted here.
oh,
I am so sorry. Okay.
Can you still hear me through here? Okay, so that's working then. Okay, I guess we have to then use this mic to reduce the echo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So this kind of digitalization helps to promote another critical component noted in the cases, coordination and collaboration between the entirety of the patient care team to provide holistic care. Lastly, the empowerment of patients to actively participate in their own care is really important, like a factor that determines whether a certain project is patient-centered. We also reviewed design literatures to understand how the keyword patient-centeredness is being used in the field. Inclusion of patients and more diverse agents assisted in the rise of new series of design practices that emphasize involving patients to productively contribute to co-produce, co-create, and co-design solutions. This is the key meaning of patient-centeredness that we researched in the design literatures. Furthermore, patient-centeredness often means, again, holistic understanding of all the relationships which do the connections between transformation mechanism and bottom-up innovation. As a result, a new role of design arises to integrate and align the different actors' perspectives while co-creating value. As mentioned, we are in the process of collecting examples from Milan and Boston to see how these definitions manifest in real-world cases. For the sake of time, we will not go to too much detail, but just wanted to show you that this is what we are doing. I hope that the definitions that we have collected so far are inspiration for today's discussion. And yeah, this was like a super fast introduction. Thank you so much again for joining our paper session. Michael will be moderating for discussions.
Thanks so much, Miso. And Miso and I are co-directors for the, and I'm going to mess this up. The name of our lab is Design for Health and Wellness.
Health and Wellness Design.
Design.
I always
Always the wrong
I think
order.
that it has dynamic.
We can switch them around a bit. And we're also collaboratively hosted with the University of Rochester's Center for Health and Technology. So we very much appreciate their involvement in this panel as well as all the panelists who generously given up their time to be here today. We're going to start out with just a little bit of a story about different aspects of patientship. And we'll move through those from a little bit from each panelist, and then we'll conclude with a Q&A at the end. Both some questions that I have for the panelists, as well as taking questions from the audience. So we're very excited to hear your thoughts as well. And we'll end with some closing remarks from Christine Sinksy, who is the director for the Center of Health and Technology at the University of Rochester. If we could start out, I'll hand our virtual mic to Kate Milliken, who's a patient advocate and also a patient as well. Kate?
Hi, guys. So I want to thank you so much for being part of this panel. I actually thought that maybe I'd kick off this panel by explaining why I'm here. So I started actually my career as an outdoor sports reporter, and I became a producer for The View and VH1. And then I went on to create a company that made high-end mini documentaries for private clients. And that was all going great until one day I woke up and I got out of bed and I couldn't keep my balance. And I realized quickly afterwards that I had been diagnosed with MS. And this experience for me led me into the world of healthcare, specifically and directly into testing the patient-centered experience. And so I wanted just to give very quickly a play-by-play of my first year, because I feel that, I was right there in the center of having a lot of quick different experiences, which were that it turned out that I had a gigantic lesion on my C4 vertebrae, and it was quite dramatic. The doctor called me and said, you need to go to the hospital where it is. You could be paralyzed, don't even pack. I went to the hospital. I got a huge uptick of steroids, which made my motor function return, but I felt horribly. And when I reached out, I was lucky enough to go to an incredible MS specialist center, which was Mount Sinai. And when I reached out to them, what I was told was, look, I hear that you don't feel well, but we can't help you. Like if you're holding a glass and you drop the glass, we can help you, but otherwise that's just the nature of the illness. And I remember having a moment personally and thinking, there's just no way I can live my life feeling this badly. And I'm super lucky to be well networked. I'm also lucky enough to have resources. And I was able at the time in 2007 to find an osteopath who met with me, and he said to me, I don't care that you have MS. Of course I can make you feel better. Why do you have it? And he recognized that MS is an inflammation of the central nervous system. What might be inflaming you? So we took a bunch of tests, and sure enough, I had some heavy metals, and I had some bad bacteria in my gut. And I assume you guys are familiar with the microbiome. If you're not, you will be. But ultimately, he said to me, look, we can wipe out the bad bacteria in your gut, re-inoculate the good bacteria, balance your system, and ideally, you'll heal yourself. I mean, very matter of fact. And then he said, I also want you to know I went to med school, and they taught you cannot reverse myelin damage, but I've seen it happen in my practice, and I would plan on it. So I was thrilled to hear this guy's perspective. I continued taking a conventional MS therapy, but I also got a whole bunch of supplements. And at one point I was even taking over 60 pills a day. I had my mercury fillings taken out in a very safe way with a homeopathic dentist. And I decided that I was going to put a Post-it on my mirror, and that I was determined to kind of reverse my own lesion. So I put a Post-it on my mirror and I said, I'm going to reverse this lesion. And it just said 2 words, which was reverse it. And when I had a check-in with my very esteemed Mount Sinai doctor, I said, I want to let you know I'm taking the conventional therapy, but I'm also working on the supplemental regimen. And he said to me, wow, in my 25 years of dealing with MS, I've never seen such an expensive circus act in my life. Would you mind if I got a camera and I took a picture? And at that point, I just looked him right in the eye and I was like, bring it on, do it, like go for it or whatever. So we had this moment. I continued the regime that I was on. And when I came back to my first year MRI, they pulled it out and there was nothing there. And the lesion had reversed itself. And in fairness, that was 2007. And here we are, over 13 years later, where they're showing there is a correlation of the microbiome and MS, and you can reverse myelin damage. So I was ahead of the curve. But for me, from that point on, I was lucky enough to actually get into the world of healthcare, and in the ways that I have been involved, hearing people's stories, and also being on kind of a more macro level. I do a lot of work with HIMSS, which is now how I know Frank, who's at the table. I have been able to really understand how people define what patient-centric is in a very micro way, and also bigger macro themes. I think all of it is really important. And I know in the next hour, we're going to hear more. So thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'd like to hand the microphone to Dr. Danny Sands, who's both physician and founder of the Society for Participatory Medicine.
Co-founder, yes.
Co-founder.
All right, can you all hear me okay? I don't know if folks there can hear me. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Good, so let me just, I'm sort of a weird person here because I'm not just a patient, although I do have a great story about how I spent, I spent a week in an ICU at my own hospital but that's another, and that pales in comparison with Frank's story about being in an ICU. But my background is that I pursued medical training, and I'd already had a background in technology, and I was frustrated that we weren't taking advantage of technology to do a better job taking care of patients. That really what got me my start. And then I found out there's this new field called medical informatics, and that I could actually train in how to use technology better to empower clinicians with technology. So that's why I went into informatics. And I did that at Beth Israel, which now is Beth Israel Deaconess, and created lots of systems to improve the care we deliver there still to this day. But a funny thing happened in my own practice as I started out there, which is that as I'm sitting with patients, one of the things that I learned is that this information technology could be equally empowering to patients and caregivers. And that was an aha moment. And it really started with two things. One was, this is the early 90s, mind you, I started exchanging email with patients, which my colleagues thought I was nuts, but it was really powerful for patients who now had a way to communicate with their primary care doctor. So that was one thing, but the other thing is that now we had all this proliferation of websites now in the mid-90s, right? Health websites. And I didn't shy away from them. I actually encouraged patients to use them. And so that was, again, it's changing the way I think about things. And I realized that this was so important for patients. And it was also important in that email area to connect patients to healthcare professionals. And they meant a lot. I mean, I can read you quotes from patients about how important this is, how life-saving this has been. And my influences came from a number of different areas. So one is my own experiences, but also Professor Warner Slack, the late Warner Slack, who was one of my mentors in informatics. And he wrote, the largest and least utilized healthcare resource is the patient. The shocking thing is he wrote that in 1976. And look where we are today. Not good. We didn't do well. Also, Tom Del Banco is in the Division of General Medicine, another mentor of mine. He participated in the Salzburg seminar that adopted this principle about patient involvement. And you've all heard this. Nothing about me without me, right? That came from there. And later he founded the Open Notes Initiative. And he was a collaborator of mine when we created one of the nation's first patient portals. Because one of the things that we realized is that communication is great, but what patients really wanted to know, not all patients, is they want to know what's going on with them, right? And then finally, another important influence and relevant to all of this is Tom Ferguson. And Tom Ferguson looked at all the work that I'd done in connecting patients with their healthcare and patient advocacy, and he brought me into a group of people. Now, Tom Ferguson, a doctor who never practiced, but became really interested in patient self-care. He actually published a journal called Patient Self-Care for patients in the 1970s, maybe even 60s and 70s. At any rate, Tom created this term when he saw what the internet could do about allowing patients to connect to information and to each other and to their healthcare. He coined this term called e-patients. And you may have heard that term. That came from Tom, my friend Tom. And but the e-patients, even though it had, it's all about these connections, the E doesn't stand for electronic. It's everything we did in those days. The E stood for engage, educate, enlighten, and empower. And Tom ultimately was brought together a group of people who later, after he died, created this nonprofit to try to change the culture of healthcare, transform this culture. And we call this the Society for Participatory Medicine. For those who are interested, I have a little card with the principles of participatory medicine and buttons. So let me just wind up by saying that in my own practice, and these are participatory medicine ideas, is that we have to look from the patient through the patient's eyes, as we said, and part of the problem is that the patients are coming into the healthcare system, and although in theory they have access to things and information, we often are comfortable, we healthcare professionals, are comfortable with this idea of information asymmetry, where the doctor knows everything and the patient knows nothing. And we try to keep patients in that area. We sometimes resist explaining things to you, and we don't want you to go out and find other information because We want to be the source of all knowledge. But that's got to go away because the information's out there, right? And now you can all see your records online, right? Next, along with that is power asymmetry. And so that's a huge problem because it leads to problems with trust. So you come into the healthcare environment, by the way, it's on my terms that you're coming in, right? It's on my schedule, my home, if you will. You got to come to my term. And I got all these people who may not look like me and they don't act like me and they're wearing white coats and that makes me uncomfortable. And it makes me uncomfortable perhaps engaging in the way that I should and asking questions, participating. So that said, I think it's important that we meet patients where they are and we design a healthcare system that meets their needs, but recognizing the fact that not all patients are prepared to be fully engaged in their health. And we can't, when I was doing the early days of email, people would say, well, can we just get rid of our phones in the practice? No, you can't do that. Because still to this day, a lot of patients prefer to use the phone. There's good reason to do it. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Like to pass the, I guess we don't, the microphones are embedded in the room. They're embedded in the room, so everybody can hear you online.
Okay.
But I'd like to pass our theoretical mic to Frank Curtida.
Oh, that's my back here, by the way. Sorry.
Who's both a faculty at Northeastern University here, as well as has written a really interesting piece for the Boston Globe about some of his experiences with the healthcare system.
Yeah, so it's a thrill and sort of an irony because I used to teach right up on the second floor here when I was teaching on ground here before moving online. So taught cross-cultural communications here for 16 years, and it's tied in with my patient story because the day that I really got sick and knew I was sick, I was grading papers, and I fell asleep on my keyboard, and I was trying to convince my wife that it was just allergies because it was beginning of allergy season like it is right now, and kept on falling asleep and couldn't wake up. And my wife said, there's this little thing called an oximeter, which now people are buying as stocking stuffers for their friends. Who would have thought 4 years ago? So a friend of ours that happened to have an oximeter put it on my finger and said, oh my God, you're somewhere around 80. I said, well, that's passing as far as I'm concerned. When I was in college, and they said, no, this is not passing in terms of oximeters. And they immediately took me to Newton Wellesley. I didn't see my wife again because she dropped me off and we had the safety protocols. They took me upstairs and they said, I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to give you some propofol and get you out of here. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you're really sick and we haven't seen anything quite like this before. So it was one of the first at Newton Wellesley that had it. I asked if I could watch, ironically, I said, don't put me to sleep until I see the end of this episode of Grey's Anatomy, because I've been watching Grey's Anatomy all season. And I said, you can't, I have to see the end. They said, are you crazy? I said, no, this is only like maybe 15 minutes. They said, okay, we'll let you watch Grey's Anatomy. And then they put me to sleep and I don't have any recollection for 45 days. I was put in an induced coma at Mass General. Spent that 45 days with my family taking care of me. This is why it's patient family centeredness, not just patient, because sometimes the patient is your family. So that has to be part of the equation, as I see it, when you look at whatever centeredness it is. I spent about a month and a half in Mass General, declared dead twice, but they brought me back and my wife wouldn't give up. The team over there wouldn't give up. Miracle of modern medicine. Wasn't able to walk. Had all my mental difficulties. And what I did from the day that I woke up, because I was in healthcare research and healthcare journalism, I looked. This is an amazing opportunity to do primary research on patient experience. It was the worst of times, and it was the best of times. So I woke up after 45 days, started looking around, and said, "Okay, what the hell is going on around me here from a patient experience point of view, with all the interactions and everything during a time where everything was dysfunctional, as you all know. It wasn't medicine as usual. So I was one of the first 11 patients there in Mass General that was this sick. I went in, it'll be 3 years ago next week, and just started watching and listening and looking and not being able to walk. I wasn't paralyzed, but I had lost all memory of how to walk. So spent that time there and became incredibly lonely. And part of my writing, as I've talked to in the Globe and some of the articles that I've written, some of the work I've done is what I call a pandemic of institutionalized loneliness and anonymity. What I mean by that is that I didn't get to see people, but for transactional, for maybe 10 minutes. And then I'd have rehab for 30, and then the rest of the day, 23 hours by yourself, watching CNN talking about what? The pandemic. Like, oh my God. I spent a time where it was really, I wasn't suicidal, but it was just, and I'm not a social animal, but it was just such an incredible experience because I didn't have anyone. It's not that they didn't want to, it's just they weren't allowed to. And that was part of my patient experience. So fortunately, there was a mental health staff there that came in. The typical patient experience, patient-centeredness in the medical profession, it's like Danny had said, is that they want to medicate the loneliness away. Well, we've got a pill for that. I said, no. I don't want a pill. That's not what I want. I feel lonely. There's got to be another process, another patient-centric process in order to correct this problem where you just don't have to dispense drugs and put me into a super state or give me sort of a pharmaceutical lobotomy where I'm happy and not really happy. So I spent the rest of the time there and then moved on to Spalding where I was taught to walk again and went through the same kinds of things because, again, there was no visitors whatsoever. The anonymity part is that there was no, these things are very low tech. I didn't see anybody but 3 full faces in 100 days. So, and when you think about the connection of someone's face and your well-being and your emotion, not being able to see those faces but 3 people. One of them said, I'm going to pull my mask down because if you see me on the street, when you get better, I want you to be able to recognize me. One of them was a swallow therapist who said, we're going to sing opera together. And she pulled down her mask and went 15 feet away from me, and we sang opera together to learn how to breathe and swallow again. The rest were, and many of them were Northeastern nursing students. They were a lot of, and I apologize, it's not sexist like I mean, there was a lot of blonde ponytails. That's all I saw, but they had a mask that was covering their face. So I still, there are many people that I still couldn't point out in the lineup that saved my life, especially the ones when I was in the ICU unit, literally took their life in their hands and saved my life. And then you go to step down and step down and step down, so you don't ever see them again. And the other thing that I talk about in this is that the patient bears a certain amount of responsibility in this to create what I refer to as the feedback loop. That's not a revolutionary term, but these caretakers never get to see the patients. And I had to force my way into Mass General to see the people that took care of me. I said, you can call 911 right now because I'm going up to give them Dom's eggplant from Waltham, where used to feed the nurses. I said, I'm taking it up myself. They said, no, we'll call security. I said, call them up, and I'm going up there right now. But it's absolutely critical that there's a feedback loop in terms of the providers and in terms of the patients to go back and see these people. Anyway, I'm walking, I'm teaching at Northeastern at University of New England. I'm writing again, I'm doing research, and it's, the thing that I think I could leave as a note is that some of the things that you're doing here in these design centers when I went to Spalding, I thought this is going to be amazing technology here because we watched the Boston bombings, we watched Spalding and Charlestown. And when I got to Spalding, I was scared to death because I thought it was going to be like boot camp in the Marine Corps. I got there and I said, well, where's all this fancy technology? And they said, you don't need that. And that the design was here. It was in the way that they tricked me to do things. It wasn't there was some fancy thing. It was, the attached to my legs, things like that. None of that, none of that. So much of the design is up here. So much of the design is in the workflow and in the process. And you can have the best design with all the gadgets and everything, all the technology, but if you don't have the process, it's going nowhere. And most of my most horrible experiences were related to process in simple things like, I'll be back in a minute. The words, I'll be back in a minute, which means I might not see you again for 3 hours. And to put it blunt, when you do the design, if you're not going to be back in a minute, you say it, it becomes the cleanup project as opposed to a care project. And sometimes in the world of COVID, during that time, they just didn't have the bodies to do it. So anyway, many other things to talk about, but we'll wait for the Q&A. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks, Frank, very much. We'd like to pass it to Alex Fielding. He's a patient advocate as well as involved in the Pharma Institute. And well, we're a little behind time, so rather than me talking, maybe I should just.
Yeah, I'll give you a brief background. So I'm Alex Fielding. I am a patient living with Friedreich's ataxia, or FA. It's a rare disease. It's recessive, genetic, progressive, degenerative neuromuscular. So, and all of those fun words, basically it's a neuromuscular disease that gets worse over time. So for me, I'm actually a kind of a rare case of a rare disease. FA affects most patients in their late childhood to early teenage years. I was actually diagnosed by mid-20s. So I kind of get thrown into the world of healthcare, going through a diagnosis for a rare disease. I was actually living just over the Mass Pike in Worcester. I love to be outside. I was doing a lot of hiking, going up mountains in New Hampshire, Vermont with friends. And I started to notice, I feel a little off. My balance is not right. My coordination isn't right. It's not the time that you want to figure that out when you're on top of that. But it was kind of a good awakening for force me to start working with a primary care physician at the time, who referred me to a neurologist in Worcester. And it was really the first time that I learned that I needed to become my own advocate, as a patient in the healthcare system. I went through a lot of testing, a lot of MRIs, EMGs, blood tests, other types of imaging. And I remember after about a year, I met with my neurologist, and he just had kind of that defeated look. He was kind of new to the hospital there. He had never seen an FA patient before. Now, I didn't really fit the clinical, symptom guidelines for FA. So I remember having that conversation where he could not give me an answer, and he was very frustrated. I was actually moving for my job, so I moved to Texas and continued my diagnosis. And by fate, I met with a neurologist at Southwestern who follows several FA patients and knew about the disease. So I was able to get to a genetically confirmed diagnosis pretty quickly. So again, through the diagnosis process, it was about a 2.5-year process for me, which sounds very long, but if you actually look for rare disease patients on average, it can be anywhere from, I've seen 4 to 6 years. So I was actually pretty blessed in that it happened quickly. Of course, you don't want to receive a diagnosis and you give, there's no treatment, no cure. But I got very involved. The Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, FARA, their main mission is to raise funds and awareness to develop meaningful treatments and therapies and eventually a cure for FA. So I get involved with them as a patient advocate. I now sit in their board of directors. And we're very excited, actually. 3 weeks ago, the FDA approved the very first treatment for FA, Scott Polaris, which is not curative, so we still have some work to do. But it has been shown clinically to slow progression and give us more time to focus on that.
Thank you so much. We also have Catherine O'Connor. It's a bit of a similar story. Yeah.
My name's Catherine. I also have prefix ataxia, same as Alex. I was diagnosed when I was 16. I don't remember it all that clearly because I was a child. But yeah, when you're 16 being told that, oh yeah, you have a disease, that means you're slowly going to lose all your abilities and then die. And there's nothing we or you or anyone can do about it. It's like a really jarring thing to hear when you're 16 and you're like, it's just starting. Anyways, since then, I've been kind of, I guess, a bad ataxian in that I kind of don't see all the doctors I'm supposed to see about it. I started out trying to go to neurologists, but like all they would do is like, let's do these tests to measure how bad your ataxia is. Try to balance with your eyes closed, do this as fast as you can, and so forth. You get the idea. Then at the end of the test, they'd be just like, oh yeah, I can see the ataxia is affecting you a little bit. And I'd say, oh, I know that. I look at this body every day. And no other ideas, no other treatment. So eventually I kind of decided that that wasn't really a great use of my limited time and energy. So I stopped seeing them. And yeah, some people told me like, oh, it's just that one doctor who was bad, you should try a different doctor. But that's like really draining when you consider like if you make an appointment, get your insurance in order, it's usually like a 6-month waiting list or something to see a specialist. And if you spend all that time building it up in your head, and then when you finally see them, they just say, oh, sorry, I can't help you. That's like frustrating. And after that happens like 3 times in a row, you start asking yourself, like, is the fourth one really going to be any different? Do I think that's going to be different? And maybe not. I guess I'm also kind of in the middle of my story because, like Alex said, Skyclairs was just fruit, which I was really excited about because Skyclairs won't prescribe me anything because nothing is fruit. The approval was announced at something like 4:45 on February 28th. At 5:20, I messaged my PCP being like, oh, look, there's something you can start doing now. Can you give me a prescription? She said, oh, well, I'm not familiar with that. No, really? So now I'm trying to find a dermatologist who can write me a prescription so that I can get it as fast as possible. Because like Alex said, it stops revision. So the earlier I can start taking it, the better. That's where I am on my journey right now.
Thank you so much. I think we have our last panelist. I don't know, was she able to join us today? Okay. Yeah, if you want to just. Okay, she didn't. Oh, yeah, which happens sometimes. I think you have stuff going on, might have other stuff that takes precedence over speaking on a panel, which I would just say I'm very grateful that 2 of you guys, and everybody was able to come today, but I recognize this takes a bit of extra effort on y'all's part, so thanks so much. Thomas Kuhn writes about scientific discovery, and he writes about kind of a paradigm shift. And there's a bit of time in a paradigm shift before a new paradigm is established, where people understand what's going on, where scientists understand what's going on in a particular situation. And during that time, the people who are in this old paradigm, like a lot of the times they'll end up fighting the knowledge that's coming from the new paradigm or not recognizing the evidence. And I think that came up in several of the stories. I think your story, Kate, highlighted that. I think your guys' story as well. Do you want to share? Do you guys have any experience with these specifically? The system kind of not recognizing what's going on, or maybe in this sense. First, patients first. Yeah.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Not speaking for myself, but I know a tangible story. One of the issues with FA, as you progress, more advanced patient have issues with cardiomyopathy in their heart, and they have issues dealing with fluid management. So I've heard a lot of stories of friends and patients going to get a surgery or get emergency care. The standard is to manage your fluids a certain way. I don't know the details, but actually it's dangerous for an FA patient. And I've, heard stories of parents, breaking down, crying, yelling in the yard, "Don't kill my kid," because you don't know what you're doing. And that is kind of that fighting, they're trying to do what they've been trained and taught to do, but it's a rare condition that has different rules that they're not aware of. And, we have to fight a lot of times to get them to hear us and take that into consideration with the care that we're receiving.
Can I say something, Michael?
Yes, please.
So, I've kind of, at this point in my trajectory, I really do feel like going into these moments of feeling frustrated by the medical system needs to come with like a little bit of a level of empathy, right? So, I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories of people, coming into a healthcare office and saying, somebody told me to eat carrots and I'm eating carrots and I'm convinced it's making me feel better. And that the medical response to that is, well, it's not clinically proven. No, right? And how do you take a look at the framework of which doctors have been taught how to guide their patients, right? Like if you end up talking to the neurologist who mocked me for what I was doing with supplements, he has heard case after case of people spending their life savings taking supplements that aren't effective. And so in some ways, and as much as I was very frustrated, by his immediate response, which I would argue was not helpful. Hold on, guys. Hey, it's gone. It's so typical. That would be a French bulldog. I apologize, everybody. In some ways, he was being protectionist, right? So if you take that carrot example, which I think is a little less scary and financially worrisome, I think part of me wonders, wow, in that moment where the doctor knows that eating carrots is not clinically proven, when does it become possible for the doctor to take a deep breath and say, I can't give you actual formal clinical results about carrots, but I'm so glad it's making you feel better. And I feel like if it's working for you, there's nothing wrong with you for continuing it, and keep me posted. So how do you have that balance of trying to streamline the way people are taught to validate what's quote good and what's not? And how do you give a feeling of empowerment and people taking their own health in control, even if it's total bullshit?
Yeah. This is the challenge, I think. Catherine, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, another thing that hasn't really been clinically proven to help is exercise for FA, or drilling the same motions again and again to work on your balance. there has been much research about that, and of course, like the medical party line is new, nothing helps. There's nothing that can affect the course of this disease at all. But people with ATACs mostly will tell you that exercise does help them feel better and keeps them more functional for longer, which is something that I wish doctors would realize and not discourage in their patients. Like, I've been discouraged from exercising because I'm at risk of falling and hurting myself, but it's worth it to me because I'm pretty sure it does make me feel better.
Can I just follow up on what you guys are saying, and follow up on what Kate says as well, is that, I think that doctors need to be trained in the scientific method and how to evaluate literature. But I think it's important we also keep in mind that the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence. And that, not every patient fits into the mold of how the studies were done, right? And so, and plus the outcomes that they're looking at may be things that were important in the study, but maybe exercise makes you feel better. Maybe it's not going to change the course, but if it makes you feel better, that's important too. So who studied that? And so I think, doctors need to be conservative, otherwise we'd be prescribing things that are unsafe. But at the same time, we do need to respect, kind of what Kate was saying, right? We need to say, look, I don't understand it, but whatever you're doing is making you feel better. And that's great, as long as it's not harmful.
Yeah, I was in a period where there was nothing longitudinal that anyone could bring to the party when I went in. Longitudinal was back in January, and I was there in March. And back in January was the nursing home in Seattle that they were clueless about. And I was in one of the best hospitals literally in the world. I'm not saying that because I'm here, but we know the hospitals I'm talking about. And having providers in hospitals and caregivers in hospitals be in a position at that status level where they just hated to say, I don't know. And they didn't. And I didn't want to hear I don't know, because I wanted them to know, because they were at Mass General, they're the gods in terms of that kind of care. But they just didn't know. And secondly, because it was so overwhelming in terms of the number of areas of your body contaminated in a very quick period of time, the collaboration aspects of care between the neurologist and the lung people and the kidney people, and just the overwhelming nature of collaboration. And as I said earlier, workflow was just totally overwhelming. And having one person say, I don't know, but having a collaborative group of people say, we just don't know, was a pretty scary thing. And it's, that changed pretty quickly. I mean, it was a year until the vaccine started coming out. So somebody said, I know what stops it. I don't know what's starting it. I don't know where it's moving to. That was a frustrating thing for me and my family. And they just don't like to say, I don't know.
Can I follow with one more thing that Catherine said, Michael?
Yes, please.
Catherine, regarding your exercise comment, the other thing I think that's hard about that is that the physician you're working with is guiding you towards living your future tentatively. So what would it be like if the doctor was like, listen, sister, there's a good chance you're going to take a wipeout, right? If you get too crazy, but why can't you push it to threshold? Are you willing to take that risk? You might fall. Sure. And that's where it's, if he framed it by saying, Catherine, I think it's awesome you want to exercise. Okay. So let's accept the fact that you have a real-time barometer of your balance that's switching every moment, right? That makes you a varsity athlete. You have to really be thinking in every move you make a lot more than other people. And I can't wait to hear what happens. Like, how would that be different for you in terms of thinking about what you can do in the long term, even with your condition?
Yeah, thanks. That would be a lot more empowering if they had raised it like that.
I was talking with Frank a little bit a couple months ago before we started this panel. I had a very exciting helicopter ride this summer, followed by a week in the ICU. And I remember like one of the best experiences of that whole thing was as I was laying on the operating table with no pants on, but I still was wearing my shirt. And the surgical assistant before she came up, she was like, "You mind if I cut your shirt off?" I said, "It's go time." But I just thought, like it's very, like the, kind of this worst moment. And she's like, and I did a lot of processing of that, just that kind question of like, "You mind if I cut your shirt?" It was a stupid gray t-shirt. I had plenty of, I don't have 20, maybe 5 of them. But like, maybe it was a shirt that was special to me and she was going to destroy it. And she asked, she took the 2 seconds to ask. I wonder, do you guys have any experiences of like positive, kind of that positive, acknowledging that you're, quite human in these processes?
The most dramatic experience I had was at Mass General during the darkest times where they couldn't come in and see you. And there was one nurse who said, I hear that you're a journalist, so you're doing this. And I started telling him what I'm doing. He asked me what I wanted to do when I got out, what I would be able to do before I could walk. And he said, people need to know about you. So he came up in his own time with all the things about me and my family and created a collage. It said, "This is Frank, has a Labradoodle, teaches snowboarding, is a professor at Northeastern, does this and does that." So that when anytime somebody came into the room, they would know it wasn't just this hunk of genome that was laying there. And he would say, "God, you have a Labradoodle?" The nurse would say, "I didn't know you had a Oh, I have a dog too. But yeah, I didn't know you were a foodie. Here's my favorite restaurants." And that was such an important thing that one person that was able to do it. And a lot of associations do it on a smaller level. I know Gold does their own getting to know me type things. But that's so transformative for the patient, where just people come in and have what we call in parties icebreakers for business dinners. Let's have an icebreaker. That was a giant icebreaker that he wasn't required to do at all. He just said this, they just have to know more about you, and I'm going to change that.
And to that point, that's a great story. Michael Berry and Susan Levitan from Mass General actually wrote a great article about shared decision making a while back. And in it, the thing that I took away from the article was that as doctors, we're really good about asking patients, what's the matter, or what's the matter with you? But we need to move towards asking patients more, what matters to you? And so I've transitioned my own practice. So when patients come in for an annual checkup, I ask them, what's most important to you? And what are your hobbies? And those kind of things. And, people say, my hobbies, nobody's ever asked me that before. And it's again, trying to humanize this, not with a patient who's in an ICU, but they're going to be in an ICU. They may be in an ICU someday, right? I want to know things about them. So I think that's important.
And we should do the same for the caretakers.
We should.
The patients should know what the caretakers' hobbies are. They should have, here's
Great point.
Nurse Nancy.
I've done a lot of different clinical trials for research studies, and it makes a huge difference. The trial coordinators, I know their names. I've seen them at fundraisers, and we'll catch, oh, how was your ski trip last winter? And having that personal connection, one, makes you feel, because like you mentioned, you're going to kind of the enemy's environment. You're going to a hospital you're not used to. They're putting you in front of all these machines. They bring you, make you feel good, make you feel comfortable, and they recognize that you're the one that we're doing all this for. So what do you need to be comfortable with? It makes a big difference.
You got to move it away from a transactional relationship, because that's what it is. Vitals are what their life is, and then I want to be able to say, I love Chinese food. Where do you go? But they have to. We can't always do it on LinkedIn and Facebook when we're a patient laying in a bed. I do it for my business every day, but I can't research my caretakers. And I don't know him when I see him because I got masked up.
Because making those connections, I think, are very important. And it's mutuality too that you're bringing up, Frank. And so when I talk about healthcare, I don't think healthcare needs to be transactional. So you almost took the words out of my mouth, Frank. It's not transactional. It is a collaboration between the patient and the healthcare professional, where the topic of that collaboration is the patient's health. And if you're going to collaborate, you need to sort of disarm. You need to, I mean, you're going to come in with your expertise. I've got my expertise. You're an expert in you. I'm an expert in healthcare. But we're going to have to work together and try to make you live the best life you can.
So, can I ask a question? Danny, for you, an example for, in that, I think that if you even use the word collaborative with a doctor, in some ways that's intimidating, I think, especially with Google. So how do you, if somebody is, are you still a practicing physician?
I am.
Okay.
Patient this afternoon.
Okay, great. So when they quote want to collaborate, is there a way that you have found in your experience where you're able to kind of limit it, where you're not, let's say, feeling like you're wasting a lot of time or getting frustrated? Like, how are you streamlining the, okay, we're going to collaborate? Like, if you say that to somebody, what are the next steps you take that actually streamline the process to be effective for everyone?
It's a great question, Kate. And I think, we were just talking a little while ago about getting to know each other, right? And knowing what's important to you, what's important to me, and so on. But I think part of that, we often talk about seeing through everything through the patient's eyes. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. And that's important. But I think that there's a mutuality there too, as well, which is that, yes, I need to appreciate the circumstances in which you're living and where you come from and, your skin color and your background, all these things, right? I need to know that. But I think you need to understand the system in which I work as well and what my limitations are. Because I think otherwise it leads to unrealistic expectations. Like Kate said, if you come in with this many papers on Friedreich's ataxia and expect me to read them like right now, that's not going to work, right? And so you need to understand, it works both ways. You need to be respectful of me too and say, look, I understand we got 20 minutes for this visit, but I hear a couple of papers I want to talk to you about. And can we meet again to talk about these things? Recognize the limitation of the system, which is a huge undercurrent to all of this, which is that when you get to the outpatient setting, we have a limited amount of time to spend with people and the clock's running. And we're too often looking at the clock and saying, yeah, I'd love to talk about that, but I got, all these patients waiting for me. And we've got to get outside of that mindset. We need to be thinking about the patient who's with us, thinking about the panel of patients. I think fee-for-service healthcare is a huge problem, and it really limits the kind of work that we can do together.
So Danny, for every 10 patients that you see, and you're like a Jedi master in theory of this process, how many of those 10 patients do you shut the door and you say, God, what a pain in the ass, or like, darn it, or what's the ratio for you?
I would love to say I have no patients like that, but that's absolutely not true. No, I think that, the proportion of patients like that, and maybe it's self-selecting, but I think overall it's a small number. I mean, maybe it's, 5% or something like that. Maybe it's not even that. And, there are patients where I close the door and say, oh, glad I got out of there. But there are many reasons for that, right? Because there may be difficult personalities, there might be unreasonable demands upon me. So there might be lots of different reasons. But I think it is overall small. But I think that learning how to work together is part of building a relationship with your healthcare professional.
I think one of the things that you guys, that's really coming up in this conversation quite a lot is the question of feeling heard as a patient, which is like subtly different than actually being heard, right? Like sometimes the doctor will hear you and will take into account what you say, but the dynamics of the situation, as you say, Dr. Sands, like press upon the physician in a way that doesn't allow them or maybe creates the situation where they don't feel they have the time to help the patient feel heard in that situation. In MISO and in my research of the literature, it seemed that feeling of being heard in the clinical care setting is the most important aspect of patient-centered care. I'm interested, do you guys think that maybe there's something different there? Is there something more? Is there something beyond feeling heard in the clinical situation that would make you feel that this was more of a patient-centered experience?
I think the system itself is set up with rounding, first of all, which means that the performance is very short, and the ability to get things across that you'd like to be heard
In inpatient.
about.
In
Inpatient
yeah.
setting, yeah, of course, yeah. But even in outpatient.
Even outpatient.
Your
amount of
appointment's
time,
over,
right?
your
Right,
appointment's
exactly.
over, you're
Yeah.
being a psychiatrist. Okay, we're done now. So I mean, I think that's part of it, being able to get the right audience to have the thing that you want to be heard is very, very challenging, considering rounding and considering, in my case, the number of patients that had to be heard. I mean, the audience that wanted to be heard was very large. And in some cases, the families had to be heard for them as well. So I think that's part of it is how much time you can devote to that to get the full point across. Keep in mind that some people with some ailments, they're very obviously, they don't have the communication skills, communicate what they want to be heard about. So, I mean, think about that. I can't really talk, so how can I be heard? And that's it. I'm not trying to over dramatize that, but there are people in hospitals down the street from us here right now that just can't do that. So how do the people that can't talk get heard? And who's going to hear for them and be able to translate what they want for them?
And to follow up on that, we often talk about teaching communication skills to healthcare professionals, which is critically important, don't get me wrong, but we should be teaching these interaction skills to patients, and even before they're patients, before your 100 days in the hospital, right? Everybody should be learning this in health class when they're in middle school. How do you engage in the healthcare system? How do you have a productive conversation with your doctor? Be an educated health concern, be an educated patient. We should be teaching these skills. So it's communication skills on both sides, and we shouldn't disregard the fact that if you're a person of color or from an underprivileged background, that's going to be that much harder.
The cross-cultural aspects are enormous of being heard, and many people died of COVID just because they couldn't communicate in the language, their natural language. So, and they could be speaking very loud, but just not understood.
Michael, I got one more thing. So I actually now am sharing my house with somebody who once was an au pair for us, who is now in nursing school. She's from South Africa. She's incredibly competent. She's going to be amazing. And I was asking her this morning about what she knew about patient-centric care. And she pulled out her textbook, and it turns out every chapter has kind of a specialized box that is talking about patient centricity, right? In terms of holistic and, recognizing caregivers or whatever. And it was pretty good in terms of like an informative 101. So I said, this is amazing. And then she said to me, and she's really busy. So she's not a slacker by any means. She's like, I actually skipped that section because they don't test me on it.
Oh.
Go. So it's beginning, right? We're starting the process, but it's not quite in there.
Put it on the test. Put it on the test.
Oh, man. Yeah, I got some feelings on that being a faculty member too. Guys, not every, well, do you guys have like maybe a future ideal for the healthcare system?
I don't have I have ideas, and I know it doesn't work. I don't really have solutions. I did probably a lot more money than I do.
Well, sometimes you can get there via negativa. So
Yeah.
let's hear.
Well, I think one of the Dan kind of mentioned it earlier too. The elephant in the room really is payment and insurance. At the end of the day, money drives activity, drives us to work and do things. It's a means to lifestyle, but kind of the example that that I put in place recently is I do physical therapy once a week, and we work on, maintaining, kind of like he was saying, maintaining motor movement and different working on balance and stepping and controlled movements. And I was seeing this physical therapist. I really liked him. He was with a big regional clinic. They started pushing a new model where instead of me seeing my therapist for an hour, I was going to see an assistant for 20 minutes and then see him for 20 minutes and then like stretch and finish for someone else. And I didn't really want to do that. And he also, his personality, he got into with therapy because he really cared about patients. So he opened his own physical therapy one-on-one clinic, and I see him now, and it's totally different. I spend the whole hour with him. We work back and forth. He doesn't know OFA, so we try things. What you think of this? I'm not really engaging my hip muscles. I'm like, okay, we're gonna try this. We're gonna. That's very important. But the money side of it that I bring up is really interesting to me because I pay the same amount when I see him now at a one-on-one clinic in his own clinic versus when I was at kind of that big, franchise therapy office. I pay the same amount and the value is astronomically different. So in my mind, that's one of the broken parts of healthcare. The value to the patient is just not always consistent with the money being charged because like you said, it's a transactional through insurance and with providers.
I agree. I mean, the reimbursement is huge and that drives care. When I teach upstairs here, I have this chart that said in the ideal world, my cross-cultural class, all the chefs will be French, all the auto manufacturers will be German, all the lovers will be Italian, of course. So I say to myself, to your question, I mean, if I were creating that ideal world of healthcare, who would I put in those, who would be the best chefs of healthcare, so to speak? And from my point of view, because of the way that it came through the healthcare system, because of my ailment, I would have a much heavier emphasis on the mental health aspect in senior positions, because no matter what care you get to solve dislocated knee or the COVID or whatever it is, there's such a huge mental health aspect to it. And that's the most underserved area, I think, in healthcare. We don't, not just healthcare in general. I mean, you look at school shootings and things like that. It just goes beyond that. It goes to burnout, all the things that we look at in a healthcare system. So, and I just don't see many, and Danny, you've been around a lot longer in those kinds of positions. I just don't see many mental health leaders that are running organizations like this for their own people as well as for the patients.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, you're bringing up physical therapy, mental health. We have a bizarre healthcare system because we place an extraordinary value on the things that are most costly. It's the pills and the procedures, right? It's been well shown that we get paid more if a patient has diabetes, we get paid much more to treat the complications, do an amputation, whatever, than to do prevention and management of the disease early. We do not think holistically about health at all, right? And physical therapy, think about it. It's ridiculous. I have patients who say, oh no, I can't do physical therapy because I pay $45 each time I have a physical therapy session. How backwards is that a health plan would do that? Because that is exactly what most people need, not procedures and injections and so on. Mental health, great example, right? We make it hard for patients to get mental health. There aren't enough mental health practitioners. And you do bring up the fact that we're, physician suicide is an all-time high. So yes, on that side as well. We don't integrate in this country. We don't integrate social care with medical care. We're not thinking holistically. Think about how hard it is to get childcare, the problems we have with long-term care services, elder care, and so on. I'm sorry, I get really angry about this.
I've got something to add to Frank's point, which is, in the world of mental health care, that's one thing, and that's complicated for a lot of reasons. I feel like certainly peer-to-peer connection is enormously powerful. And, you know, even in Frank's case of feeling so lonely, being able to find a way, even if it's, 15 minutes to get a moment of contact and being able to share on a level where everybody knows something is great. I think you can take that a step further. And for some people on the healing journey, it can become a process that ends up being reflective about how you're living your whole life, right? So in as much as you get this scary diagnosis, you learn how to accept it, you learn how to manage it. And then there is a population that decides to not only move forward with it, but to actually start giving back. And Frank is a wonderful example of that he's hit the speaking tour talking about what it's like to be long COVID, in the Boston Globe and wherever else, right? So that kind of sense of reflection on the journey, I think is really powerful, almost using it as a measure on how you live your life. The other thing I would say is, and this is a little bit out of direct patient centricity, is basic education. So as a result of some of the work I've done on the bigger healthcare space, I'm totally convinced that if real lay people understood how healthcare worked, they'd be a lot more empathetic. So for example, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in where people are like, I can't believe I can't get my medical records, passed over. What a pain in the ass. And it's like, well, do you know how medical records work? Somebody thought it'd be a good idea to make computer systems. There were two companies. One was called Epic, one was called Cerner. They began to sell. One Epic would say, oh, we can make yours extra special. So we're going to give you all these plugins. And all of a sudden the interoperability was impossible. And within that conversation, people are like, that's so twisted. And wow, that is hard. And how do you solve that problem? So I feel like some sort of, taking a step back, recognizing that the processes can be warped, but also giving some sort of understanding of why it's complicated. That level of empathy, I think, puts everyone on a more even plane.
Did you have something?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to build up on the financial incentives that have been mentioned a couple of times. One thing I have done not just for my health is I've been doing a lot of clinical trials for experimental medication. And I feel like my experience there is always a lot better, partly because the people running the trial have, a financial incentive to make sure it succeeds. So they're going to be making sure everything is in order, and they want you to come back because there's, a limited patient population of people who are willing and able to do clinical trials. And they don't want to isolate anyone. So my experience there has been way better, but of course that's not, I don't know how we could tie that back into the political system because, like you said, those clinical trials are mostly for pills and pharmaceuticals and not things like physical therapy, which probably help a lot, but no one wants to compound study. So, yeah, no real answers, just something to think about.
One thing I would do, remind me, I'm a little biased, and maybe I'm making a plug, but Farah Fonten has put together one little care guideline for FA, and by doing it, they basically take all the key opinion leaders, clinicians, neurologists, researchers, and on different topics, how to deal with cardiac symptoms of FA, neurological symptoms, FA and exercise, FA diet, diabetes complications. So they put together this long, comprehensive, it's like 1,200 pages. To your point, I don't expect my doctor to be, at Friday. Also, there are a lot of patients who are not, scientifically trained to understand all of that. So having, it's Barry in this case, but it could be another patient advocacy group, or I don't know who would set it up, but having a document like that kind of in sections, here's a 4-page section of diabetes with FA. here are some of the key studies. If you want to learn more, here are kind of the bullet point recommendations. Here's the strength of those recommendations. Here's the people that gave. So I can go to my doctor and say, if I'm having an issue, with this symptom, hey, there's this document. Can you read a few pages? What do you think? Oh, they recommend we do this. Or for that, diabetes is a complication for FA. So I get tested now. Luckily, it's not manifested itself, but it's something that my doctor said I would have never thought to look for that. Now we're just going to add that to your annual visit.
I think the question of these structures and we're talking about like value and cost. One of the most exciting and also depressing presentations I sat through in a panel on patient-centered design about 2 years ago was looking at creating a physician colloquium to consult on chronic.
And I'm sure you're doing the best.
No. But the reason I'm the co-chair, it's falling, is because of exactly what you said. It's a checkoff box for HCAHPS
Exactly.
and reimbursement.
Yeah.
And I am their pain in the ass in saying, we are going to drive innovation. And but you have to operate, like in prison, you have to operate outside the general population. Because
Yes,
if you try to do it within
that's right.
the general population, it's never gonna get done. So you need somebody that just throws grenades into these things and says, I'm just, I'm not taking that as an answer anymore. With joint committee, I sit on those meetings, and I'm just, you need a patient or a family member, even more so, that's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
To do it.
We'll go with metaphoric grenades on.
Yeah.
So it's an intellectual grenade.
Yeah, intellectual. Yeah, thank you very much. We really appreciate all of the thoughts that were shared today, especially those of our patients who were able to pay some cost to be here today.
I would like to mention that every patient here has demonstrated an excellent sense of humor, which is also very important.
Can I just want to add one design thing? I know you're running short on time. Most of what I've seen in design, patient-centric design and healthcare design in general, the British have this thing, the signs on their subway that said, mind the gaps. And every bad experience that I've had in healthcare is at the handoff point. And nobody is minding the gaps. So I get a survey done here at Mass General, I get a survey done here at Spalding, but nobody surveys me at the gaps. So if you look at the design and you don't look at the gaps, if you just look at it here and not what's happening, like when I'm going from the ambulance to point A to point B, because nobody in the ambulance is giving me a survey at that point, it's not going to show up on the radar. So in your design work, it doesn't have to be technology. Low tech is best, workflow, and mind the gaps.
Thank you.
So we have 30 minutes left. What about design? So what can
We have
No, we don't.
6 minutes left. We're supposed to be going to Christine for the wrap up.
I am patient 35 minutes.
Okay, so that all of them.
We're supposed to be throwing
We have 6
to.
minutes, yeah. What about design?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, what can we do as designers
What can we do as designers?
for all of that we heard?
You asking me?
All of us.
You talking to me?
So what can?
I wish I'd say, oh, sorry, guys. I would say, sorry, guys. I would say that I hope that people who are designers can actually infiltrate the hospital system, because I think hospitals do a terrible job of deciding to put together a new app, and the UI UX is horrific. So if there's a way that you are an actual beautiful designer, that somehow you can convince an administrative system that you're worth it, that would be a great start.
That's very good.
Well, I will say, for those of you physicians in the audience here and online, our last NIH grant, one of the very positive comments, they wrote a whole paragraph about how excited they were to see a designer on the team. So we do bring value to this conversation. It's very, do we have any other questions from the audience before we wrap up?
As a bunch of I was wondering if any of you have had a particularly positive experience with technology, whether it be a very well-designed patient portal or a digital support group that you found for your physician, or something like that, where anybody, a technologist here, could focus on that and improving that experience.
Technology is your enemy and it's the cure as well. So it's a combination of technology. It's creating burnout and having to solve burnout as well. I always talk about technology because I'm a content person. It's happened to be a technology most of my life. You have the container, which is the thing that holds the contents, right? And sometimes we gravitate towards the container and not the contents. So technology is only good as the insight you're giving in the platform that you're on. My experience with portals and my career is based on analyzing portals, criticizing them, is that they're horrendous. And they're not patient-centric, and I have to work where I have to go to get my INR result and what dosage I need. You know, the world operates in clicks and screen views. So click reduction is absolutely critical in getting the information to the patient at the point of need. It's critical as well, just like.
It's even worse for the EHRs for the physicians.
It is, clinical
Yeah.
physician support is even worse.
But
as
just
well.
using the EHRs,
Yeah,
too many
so
clicks.
that's why we see suicide rates going up, and people leaving the profession, nurses and. So I think the technology is great. Some of the devices that I've seen are fantastic. Like my cardio mobile is a life changer for me because I knew I was getting an accurate EKG reading off of the device. So yeah, that's a whole course I teach. Yeah, let's do it.
Can I just add one thing? So I ended up raising close to $1 million in building an online community for people living with chronic illness. And unfortunately, it's offline right now. It's called Moodify.com. But I will tell you that in as much as I wasn't ultimately able to monetize it, what it needed, the UI was fabulous. But what those places need is a real level of authenticity. I think that there are a lot of people. I mean, I'm on the Novartis, online board, and they're talking about making some sort of support community, and none of them work because they just don't feel authentic. And I will say that I did have the experience of creating a community that was so authentic that the people that used it, which were, over 400 people, the level of engagement for them was over 10 minutes a session, at least once a day for up to 2 years. And it became this unbelievable healthy habit for people who wanted to use each other to be better. So I think technology is a wonderful way to try to connect people. But if you're trying to build something for a population, like for example, for ataxia, it's not going to be successful unless you have someone like Alex or Catherine who are leading the helm and who can intrinsically bring people in a way that they trust. That's just my opinion.
I think you mentioned earlier about simplicity. I think that understated, it's extremely important because I feel like a lot of times, there are different portals, there are different doctors, and we have all these articles. We're going to help you and we're going to give you all this info. I'm trying to live my life. I'm trying to do things I want to do. You're defining me as a patient with FA. I'm defining myself as Alex Fielding, who has FA. So keeping it simple where you're not trying to overwhelm me with things. I can go about my day, but that's part of my life and I want to learn what I can. That's also important. So like Kate was saying, keeping the patient, knowing your customer, your end user is the patient. What's important in that, understanding our limitations or kind of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis can really help you make a good decision of what's important to us and how are we going to integrate interface that.
I want to add something too, and this is partially to answer your question as well, Paula, because I think that user interface, so design is more than user interfaces, as I'm sure you know better than I do. And that's important, but I'm going to read you two comments from patients of mine. So I helped create one of the nation's first patient portals that went live 23 years ago, where patients could all of a sudden communicate with me or website and see their record online. And just to speak about design, I have one patient who was a marketing consultant who is in his 58 years old when he wrote. And can I ask all my patients just blindly, what do you think about this system that we're using, portal? And so this is patient number one. He said, this is too cool. It's almost silly that things could be this easy. I am having a very good patient/customer experience so far. So he thought it's amazing that all of a sudden he's treated like a customer and he's able to do these transactions, like make an appointment online and get his prescription and so on. So that's what was important to him. Now, by the way, the user interface of this system sucked, and it still is not great. But there's a huge amount of value to it still because we're designing what the patients are going through. The second one, totally different. This is a retired minister who's crippled with chronic pain. And he said, I have a lot of medical issues. This system has left me feeling comfortable and in good hands. Otherwise, I would feel as cold, depleted, and alone as the lifeless tree in my front yard in the deepest of winter. Wow, right? So, and again, bad user interface. But to your question, what can you do as designers? Well, we need to be redesigning the whole experience of what patients are going through. And for that matter, healthcare professionals too. Let's reimagine this. Like I said, with the PFAX, let's get outside that box. Let's think about what the healthcare experience should be. And it's not just about what takes place in the office. We need to be designing healthcare holistically. And yes, we're going to run into barriers and payment models and things like that. But we need to think about how do you get care when you're not here? How do you get information when you're not here? What are the ways you connect with care and other patients and so on? We can do so much better. And that's where your expertise comes in.
Thank you very much. We'll take the last question from Disha Rathod online. Disha, do you mind unmuting to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Actually, this is Deepthi. I joined through Disha's ID, but hi, everyone. When I was listening to the conversation, especially piggybacking from what Kate just mentioned about how the patients and everyone actually in this entire ecosystem, in these relationships that we have, they don't know what's going about in the background, right? With respect to how the forms come about. I think with what also you mentioned about the gaps, minding the gaps, it's all about filling that space with using a very simple tool, which is, I think, communication, just letting everyone know, just exchanging information in the right way to let everyone be in the same picture, to be on the same page. With that, I was also this was just a thought that came into my mind. You mentioned that the patient should know what's going on in the back, but at the same time, the patient also is going through so much at that time. They are just concerned about their medication. They are concerned about, it's a big thing for them to even come to a stage to actually have a consultation with the doctor. It's a big step for them to be in that space as well. So it's quite confusing to, mitigate this kind of a situation, to see how do you actually go about with solving, or actually not even solving, just moving forward with this entire space in general. How do you bridge the gap and mind the gap, right? So I just wanted to understand everyone's thoughts on, are there, other than communication, which is a very big thing, is there anything else that could be a potential factor that could help in bridging the gap and bring everyone on the same page?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. What do you guys think?
I think that's you kind of answered it. I don't know how to do it, but that's the answer. It's really just during those handoffs, as a patient, you have no idea what's going on in the background. So, we're kind of informed and educated. We're the e-patients. I always ask my doctor or clinician, okay, you're going to do this. What's the timeline? Can I expect a call? Should I reach out? What should I do? But a lot of people don't know to ask those things. And a lot of people are just kind of, okay, you know, here's my copay, you took a blood sample. I don't really know what's going on. So just having that communication of here's what we're doing, here's the logistical things too. There's a time frame, we'll reach out to you or you call us back in 2 weeks is, you know, huge.
How about mutual,
Closing,
yeah, how about mutual empathy? I need to think about your perspective, you need to think about my perspective, and that's how we're gonna close the gap together.
Yeah, that
Agreed.
it's important, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that people who are in healthcare system are like probably have hard lives, especially chronic illness patients like us, or people with something more acute going on, like, and you know, it sometimes feels like just coordinating all these different handoffs can be like a full-time job, which is a lot, because we also have to pay rent, so we probably have our own jobs. In addition to dealing with our health. So I think place less burden on patients to figure out themselves would be helpful.
What's going on in the background is it can't always just be accomplished by the caretakers. I mean, there is a content business where even the doctors can't explain what's going on in the background as well as somebody else could. So the ability to curate and deliver content at the moment that somebody needs it without having to bring the doctor back to do it. There are lots of doctors that could talk about many of the issues that you have, many of the issues that I've had, but I don't need my guy or person there to do it. And I think that kind of content curation so that you could press the button. I used to have a lot of time sitting in a room without anything to do. So there is the ability using technology and the iPads and things like that to start delivering content and say, okay, I don't get what's going on behind the scenes, but here's something that's directed where I don't need hospital staff to do it. Because I don't know about any hospitals near you, but there's no surplus of staff to do it.
Thank you so much for answering my question. Yeah, that really helped. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for asking, and thank you everyone for making this conversation a part of your day. I'd like to throw to Christine Zizi from University of Rochester Center for Health and Technology. Also a special thank you to Maya El Wakil, who's been recording our conversation. So we'll share this through the website and circle back with you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
First time. Okay, great. So yeah, as Michael said, I'm Christine. I'm from the Center for Health and Technology at the University of Rochester and was collaborating with the Center for Design to help put on this panel. And it's been incredible to sit back and listen to the conversations. I come from a bit more of the clinical research world. And so like Catherine mentioned, how, there are some areas that the clinical research world is doing well in and has a few one-ups than just the patient care setting. There's still plenty of room for improvement. And I think a lot of the themes that came up today are really important themes to be considered in the clinical research process. And it's things that I actually am really trying to push forward here. So I'm the founder of a new division within our center that's all about community engagement, all about centering the patient. But there's a lot of work to be done. So even just, I think someone mentioned the importance, I think it was Kate, of having a UX specialist on the team or a design specialist. It's tough to tell our medical professionals, hey, we need these design folks. It's really important, but we are getting there.
Yeah, get in there, Christine.
We're getting there. I mean, this collaboration right here is part of us showing how important it is, these ways of thinking about the users who are so important. And I think determining what matters most to patients, that's something we're really working on. We, in the clinical trial process, it's tough to make sure the patients' voices are being heard on what matters most. Like, who cares if something's helping if it's not improving quality of life or disease burden? And the patients are the only ones who can say what actually matters. And so I think that's a theme that's really relevant that we're trying to improve in the clinical research world. The power asymmetry is always a difficult challenge. And I think, especially when we think about ways we can improve in terms of equity in clinical research, and that's a whole nother conversation of patient-centeredness, but also crossing it with equity and how can we reach those who are traditionally underrepresented in research. And I think so much of what we talked about today can be tools to use in improving that, like community-based participatory research, where the patients are a part. There's no research without patients. So they are obviously key members of the team. And sometimes I think they aren't treated that way. And I think it's really important. And I think that's exactly what was being talked about today, is when you're a patient in the room, you're just as just as important as a member of a team as the doctor is. And so that's just all to say, I think all these conversations were great. And I think it applies to my clinical research world. It applies to directly thinking about design in the patient care setting. And I think the more we can have these conversations, the better. So I was glad to be part of this conversation today. Thank you so much. And I'd love to connect with anyone who's interested. All the panelists today, I would love to connect with you two offline. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Catherine, Alex, Frank, Dr. Danny Sands, Kate Milliken. We really appreciate your guys' contribution today. We have a lot of events coming up with the rest of Design Week. Paolo, did you want to pitch anything? Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Anyone's interested in participatory medicine, just here, pick a card, pick a button, whatever. You guys are official e-patients, I'd say. Yeah, e-patients probably. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.